Hey there, how's it going everyone? In this video, we're going to go ahead and continue from where I've stopped. In the last video, we went ahead and created our recipes, and then we went and checked our home route to see if the recipes had been created. And when we save, so for example, if I created a new recipe, so let me say uh, biscuits, and then let me say them, and then I save. We now see that our form does not reset and we need to also redirect to the home page. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is to go back to our Visual Studio Code, and within our Visual Studio Code, I'm going to make use of our reset function from React hook form. So the use form hook provides us with this reset function that enables us to reset our form. So what I'm going to do is to just come right after we have also logged our data. So I'm going to remove this. What I'm going to do is to just reset the form. So I'm going to call the reset function, and when I save, we head over to our front end. And after refreshing, for example, if we create another recipe, this time we see that if our data is submitted, we can be able to reset our form. So when you go to our create recipes, our home page, we now see that whatever recipes we've been created are created. Now we're going to also take care of pagination in the coming videos, but for now let's go ahead and implement a functionality that's going to help us to update our recipe. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to use React Bootstrap. So React Bootstrap provides us a model that can help us to display things that we want to display on the same page. For example, I'm going to head over to the React Bootstrap documentation. Right now we can see the model documentation. So for you to get to the model documentation, all you need to do is to go to the component section and then be able to search for models. You need to search for models. Now this is the documentation for models. So a model is simply sort of like a pop-up where you can put whatever HTML code content you may want to use. Now in this case, what you need is to put a form that's going to update each recipe within this model component. So let's go ahead and browse through the different models. For example, you can have an action that can trigger a model to pop up, just like you can see right now. So when we close it, we can be able to close it. So what I'm going to do is to actually search for the model we're going to use in this video, and we are going to be using a model of a size that's large enough to contain our model. So for example, here we see optional sizes. Within our optional sizes, we can select to choose a small model. We can also choose to use a large model. So right here we see that we have states that set uh, whether the model should be shown or not. So we can set this within our state. So let's go ahead and implement this. Now one thing you can note here is we have the size prop within our model that describes whether this is a small or this is a large model. So we also have the show property that declares whether this should be shown or not. We also have on hide, which basically shows that this model should be hidden when we hide it. So let's go ahead and implement our own model. So we need to pull up our Visual Studio Code, and within our home.js, what I'm going to do is to implement a model. So the first thing to do is always to import it from React Bootstrap. So what I'm going to do is to say import. So in this case, what I'm going to say is import. So I'm going to import model from React Bootstrap. And after importing the model, I'm going to put the models just above our content in our home page. So what I'm going to do is to just come right here, and what I'll do is to come and say model. So I'll create a model, and then this model is going to take in the various props just like we've seen on the documentation. So the first prop I'm going to do is the show prop. I'm going to set the show prop to a prop. So I'm going to use the useState hook to set the initial value of our show prop. I'm going to come right here, and all I'm going to do is const. So in this case, we're going to set a prop called show, and then we're going to set the state updater function, which is going to be set show, and then we shall use the useState hook to set the initial state false. So right now what we mean is we need our model not to be shown. So this model is going to contain our form that you're going to update each recipe. So when I come right here, I'll say that our show is going to be show. So right now we can see that our show is show. Sorry for that. And then the next thing I'm going to also specify is our size. So we need our size of this model be the large size. So we just specify it as LG. Then the next thing we shall also specify is our own hide attribute. So in this case, we're going to use our own custom function that's going to hide this model when we hide it. What I'll do is to just create this function and close model. So I'll come at the top of the code, actually below our use effect hook. What I'll do is to say const close model going to be equal to a function. And what this function is going to do is it's going to actually close our model. So by closing our model, what we shall do is to just update the state of our show state to. So now what we need is we need to trigger these various events of showing our model. So let's go ahead and do that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and implement some HTML within our model. What I'm going to do is to come right in our model. I'll implement a heading for our model. So what I'll do is to say model dot header. So we're going to provide a header, and then within our header, we are going to also provide a special prop that's going to help us to show a close button. So what I'll do is to come within here and say close. So in this case, it's going to be a close button. So when I provide this, we can be able to see the X. For example, when you come right here, you can be able to see this X that's going to close down model. When I go back to our Visual Studio Code, I provided the heading. Now let's put our title in our heading. So what I'll do is to say model dot title. So this is going to be our title. And then within our title, what I'll do is to say update. This is going to be update recipe. And now after doing this, I'll also specify the body of our model. So what I'll do is to say model dot body. This is going to be model dot body. And then within our body, what I'll do is to actually just put a simple paragraph. So I'm going to just specify a simple paragraph, and then this paragraph is going to be update. So I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to also write a function that's going to help us to trigger our models to be open. What I'll do is to just come. So I'm going to first move that. And what I'll do is to come on each recipe, we are going to add a specific button that's going to help us to pop up a model for that specific recipe. So I'll head over to recipe.js where we have our recipe component. Now, if you're observant, I changed this to cards as we saw in the previous video. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to be able to add a button which I'm going to click and then pop up a model for that specific recipe. So you need to go ahead and import model from React Bootstrap. And then after importing model, what I'm going to do is to just come right below the description. And what I'll do is to just provide a button. So we're going to use a button from React Bootstrap and it's auto imported. So this button is going to have a variant. So in this case, our variant is going to be, let me say, primary. And then what we shall do is to just actually add text. So this text is going to be update. So when I save this and we head over to our front end, we head over to our front end. Now we can see that each button here, each recipe here is having an update button. So let's go ahead and add an event listener to this button. So when it is clicked, it can be able to pop up a model for a specific recipe. So what I'll do is to come right here. I'll add an on-click handler. So I'll say click. Then I'm going to lift this prop to the upper prop, which is going to be our home prop, our home component. Sorry for that. What I'll do here is to just say on click is going to be on click. And right here, I'll just come right in here and also specify this. So this is going to be on click. So this prop is going to move upwards to the home component. So I'm going to go to our home.js and where we declare our recipe component, I'm going to just add the on-click property. So what I'll do is to just come right here and say on click. So the on-click property can be accessed here. And then what I'll do is to create a simple function that's going to pop up a model. So what I'll do is to just say show model. So show model is a function that's going to help us to show our model. I'm going to save this and come right above here. So I'm going to create this function. So what I'll do is to say const show model is going to be equal to a function. And this function is going to simply set our show state to true. So let's try and to do that. So and to correct this, let's first actually see how it's going to work. So if I save, so right now we can see we have an error here. Let's try to see syntax error. And I head over to our show. So this is going to be function that's going to actually be an arrow function. So when I save this, right here we have our front end. So we have show model not defined. So let's try to see here. This is show model. And then right here we have show model. Let's try to see what's wrong. So we have show model, and then this one is also show model. So let's just actually try to create a function that's going to call this. So when I say show model, it's going to be show model. So let's try to call this. When I refresh, see that we have an expected assignment. Let's try to fix this. So I'm going to come, remove this, save. We now have our recipes rendered to the front end. Now, if I update, we see that a model has been displayed on our front end. Now, what we're going to do is to actually add our form similar to our create recipe form with all the validation in this form. So we're going to go ahead and put all that in our form body. So to do this, I'm going to close this model. And what I'll do is to head over to the create recipe.js file. And one thing I'm going to do is to actually copy the whole form, just like we created it in the previous video. I'm going to copy this whole form, all the validations. I'm going to end on the form tag. And then I'll come back to the home page. And then within our model, sorry for that. So what I'll do is to actually just come and paste this whole form right in our model body. I'm going to tidy this up by formatting. So I'm going to format this to tidy this up. So now we can see that our form has been added here. So when I save, head over this way, we expect to have errors. So we have not yet imported all the validation stuff from React Hook form. We're going to go ahead and fix that. So what I'll do is to come to our code, and then right here what I'll say is we need to import the hook form to import React Hook form. So what I'll do is just say import use form. So I'm going to import the use form hook. And after importing it, we shall access the various things that we need. So in this case, we're going to access register. We shall also access set. We are also going to access handle submit. And then we are going to also get access to the form state. So then within the form state, we shall also have access to errors. So this is all going to be from the use form hook. After we've done this, so when I save, we expect that now our things are going to work. So we also have form not being defined. So I'm going to import that from React Bootstrap. You need to just come right here and import form. And when I save, now see that we don't have a button. So I'm going to also import button, React Bootstrap. We have create recipe non-defined. So what I'm going to do is to actually remove this, replace it with, so this is going to be update recipe. So when I save, we have update recipe non-defined. So basically what I'm going to do is to just create that function here. So I'll just come and say const update recipe is going to be equal to a function that is going to just console log. So this function will take in the data as an object containing the various data in the fields of this form. So what we shall do for now is to just also log the data. When I save, now see that, so we have an error. We have form is not defined. So let's try to see. So this is create recipe not defined. So let's try to see here. And come back here. I've actually solved that. So now we have a list of recipes being defined. So when I say update, you now see that a form is being defined, has been shown on the front end. And when you try to save it, you see that all our validations are now also working. So right now, let's go ahead and handle the various logic we're going to use to submit our form with updated data. So to do that, I'm going to just have to access a particular recipe when I click on it and display all of its data within our form. So what I'm going to do is to close the model for now. Now I'm going to come within our code. Now we have our update recipe having the data. So right now what we need is to get the ID of a recipe. So the that what I'm going to do is to actually come back to our front end and inspect our console. So I'm going to go within our console. Now we have one specific error. And now we see that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Now this is one thing that we forgot to actually do when rendering a release of components. So in this case, what we need is to provide a unique key prop or a unique key that's going to identify each component within our list. So we need to head over to our home.js. I'm going to change something. So what I'll change is to provide that key. So within where we map on our recipes from the API, what I'm going to do is to provide the key. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to provide this key. So I'll come and access the index of each recipe. So what I'll do is to say index, and then what I'll do is to say that the key is going to be the index of each recipe. After doing this, I'm going to save. When I save, now going to see that this error is going to be gone. So if I refresh, you see that the error has been taken away. So I'm also going to remove the console log of our data from the API right in here. Save. So right now we see that our console has no output for our data from the API. Okay, now we are set. Let's go ahead and access each of these recipes. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to access each of them by their ID. What I'll do is to actually come right in here. So right now we have this on click which is going to show a model. So we can also actually access the recipe of each model. So instead of showing the model, we want to access the specific recipe we need. So I may provide the recipe ID for that. So to do that, I'm going to just say recipe.id. So this function show model is going to take in the recipe of each is going to take in the recipe of that specific recipe we've clicked on. So I'm going to go ahead and also do that within our show model function. So I'll provide an ID parameter, and then right here I'm going to actually console log. So I'm going to console log, and what our console log is hello, then the ID. So in this case I'm going to say hello plus the ID. So after doing that, let's see what is going to happen. So when I save, head over here, try to refresh. We see that we have an error. So React limits the number of, this is an infinite. So to fix this error, what I'm going to do is to actually call a function on every recipe that's actually going to call a function to act on an individual recipe. So to do that, I'm going to head over to Visual Studio Code, and where we have our on click, I'm going to change this to a function. So this function is going to trigger the show model with the ID. So when I save this, so right now hoping that everything is working, we have our recipes working again. And if we click update, our model is going to display. Now let's try to also inspect our element. So when we inspect our element and we go to our console, you can see that now it's showing us the IDs of the various recipe. So for example, if I clicked on ID with recipe 7, and also go ahead and do the same for, let's say, a recipe of ID 10, and so on. So let's go ahead and access the data of these recipes. What I'm going to do is to come back to our Visual Studio Code. Within our show model ID function, what I'll do is to actually come right here, and what I'll do is to uh, so right now I can actually map through all the recipes and get that recipe with that ID. So to do that, since we have our recipes within our recipes variable, what I can do is to actually map through all of them, and then our map is going to take in a callback function. So this callback function is going to simply act on each of the recipes. What I'll do is to actually console log. So right now, if let's say we want that recipe with that specific ID, I'll put in a simple function right here. Sorry for going off track. So I'll say if recipe dot ID is equal to the ID we provide from our function, then all we need is to actually console log this recipe. So what I'll do is to actually console log the recipe. So actually I'll change this to recipe since I said item. In this case, what we need is the recipe. So that we have the recipe.id, then we log the recipe. So when I save, hoping that we don't have errors, I head over to our front end. Now in case we click on each modal, we see that the recipe we've clicked on is the one that we that is displayed in this case. So let's go ahead and try to set our form data to what we have in this recipe. So to do that, I'll just come right in here, and since we are using React Hook Form, it provides us with a function that helps us to set the values of our inputs. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. So to do that, I'm going to simply come within our use form hook, and I'll add another function. So what I'm going to add here is the set value function. So the set value function works in this way. It helps you to select the input you'd like to update, and then the data you'd like to set into that input. So let's see how that is going to happen. So what I'm going to do is to come right here within our after our console log. So I'll remove the console log, and then what I'll do is to set value. So we're going to keep track of the names that we registered our various inputs with. So for example, when I go to our input, so here we have our title as well as our description. So I'm going to do is to say set value for the title, and then what I'll do is to set it to the recipe we've got dot title, and then the next thing is going to be to set the value of the, in this case it's going to be description. So what I'll set is recipe dot description. After doing this, what I'm going to do is to save, hoping that we don't have any errors. If I head up to our front end, if I click on this recipe, we now see that the data of that specific recipe is found within our form inputs. Let me go ahead and close that. So if I went to another recipe, for example, this one, you also see that this data is within these form inputs. So I'm going to go back to our code. And now within our code, I'm going to remove this hello ID console log. After removing it, the next thing is going to be to actually get the data within our forms. So right here, we have this update function, this function update recipe that takes in the data of the form and then console logs it as an object. So let's see how that's happening. So when I save and head over to our client, see that it's refreshing. So when I say title and then I say save, we see that an object containing our title and our description is going to be console log. However, what we need is when we submit this form, for example, with data such as, let's say, title to data and then title description data, and I save this, all we need to do is to send this data to our server via the API, and then be able to update this recipe to the data, to the new data that we provided. So let's go ahead and do that. So right now, what I'm going to do is to come and be able to set the ID of this recipe. So to do this, I'm going to use the useState hook to set the recipe ID to a certain state and then set it within this specific function. We need to head over to our useState, then up this side below our code for the rendering. So what I'll do is to say const. So this is going to be we need to set the recipe ID. So we need to set a recipe ID, and then I'll set the state updater function. So this is going to be set recipe ID, and then it's going to be use state. So when we use state, we are also going to set the initial state of this to 0. So I'll set it to 0. And after doing this, I'm going to come below, and I also set it to the ID. So right here, what I'll do is to actually set this ID to. So I'll say set recipe ID to our ID. And now this means that we can be able to access this recipe ID even outside the show modal function. So if I save, I'm going to come right in here. What I'll do is to just console log. So right now, what I need is to console log. We need to say console log. Then what I'll need is the recipe ID. When I save this, I'm going to head over to our client. So when I say update, so right now we have an error. So let's see this. So it's not a function. So let's go ahead and fix this. So this is not a function. So this is actually set recipe ID. So we have a problem here. So this is the function we actually need to call. So we now see that everything is all right. So when we say, so this actually shows a model for that specific recipe. So when we save, can see the ID of 6. So what we need this ID for is that we're going to use it in the route. So if I head over to our backend documentation, for example, it's localhost 5000 / docs. The route that we are in need of is one that helps us to update our recipe, and that is /recipe/recipe/id. Now you will notice that the specific IDs I'm getting from the recipes are their real IDs at the back end or at the API side. So right now, if I went to this route and I say try it out, so we even have data, like we need the title, description, and the string. So if I say execute, now have an ID. So let me say if I provide an ID of 1 and execute, we see that we are missing authorization headers. So we're going to require to have our token from our local storage and be able to use it here to be able to update our recipe. We need to head over to our React app. We need to close that, also close this. So what I'll do is to first access our recipe. So we're going to use the fetch API to send our updated data to our back end. So to do that, I'm going to come right in here. What I'll do is to first get our token from our local storage. So I'm going to say let token be equal to. So this is going to be local storage dot get item. So we realize we did the same logic for the previous video when we wanted to create a recipe. So you need to head over to create recipe.js, and then within our function that creates a recipe, what I'm going to do is to actually copy this React token of key value. So I'm going to copy it and paste it within here. Then what I'll do is to close that. So right now, if we were to access our token, we can also be able to show it in the console. So let me say if I console log our token, now we can be able to access our token. So for example, if I saved, went back to our recipe. So if I said update recipe and then let's say save. So what we have here is in the inspector element, go to our console. Right now we see that we can be able to access our token from local storage. So let me go ahead and try to use a fetch function to send our updated data to our API. So let's head over to our Visual Studio Code. I'm going to remove our token. Now I'm also going to remove this console log for our ID. So I'm going to set an object containing our request options. So to do this, I'm going to say const request options. So this is going to be the request options object. And this is going to be just an object. So this object will have three things. It will have the method with which we're going to send this data. In this case, the method is going to be. Next thing we're going to specify is the header, which is going to have the headers we're going to send with this request. So the header, in this case, we need the headers, and then what we need is to specify our headers as an object. The first key is going to be our content type. So I'll send a content type as JSON. So what I'll do is to say content type. Then it's going to be, sorry for that. This is going to be application slash JSON. Now, after doing this, the next thing is also going to be to specify the authorization header. Now, you realize in the previous videos that we needed to access a protected route or with an access token that you pass within our authorization header. We're going to create the authorization header. So this is going to be our authorization. And then the value of this is going to be our bearer and the token. I'm going to use JavaScript template strings. So what I'll do is to say bearer. And then what I'll do in this case is specify $sign, and then this is where I'm going to put the token. So within here, I'll just pass it. So what I'll do is to say JSON dot pass, and then I'll specify the token in this case. After doing this, then what we need to specify is the body. So I'll come and specify the body. So in this case, our body is going to be, so we need to JSONify, to stringify this object to turn it into data that we can actually make use of with our API. So we need to say JSON dot, this is going to be JSON dot stringify, and then we pass in the data. So now since we have our ID, we can be able to make that request. So I'm going to create a simple fetch function just below here. So I'll do is say fetch. And then our URL in this case is going to be, so if we go to our backend documentation, we have the ID being, we have the URL being recipe ID. If I come right here, so we can be able to access that. So if I say slash recipe and then slash recipe, in slash, for example, we can pass in the ID. In this case, what I'll do is to actually use JavaScript string retros, template retros strings. And after doing this, what I'll do is to actually come and then add. So in this case, we shall say recipe ID, since that is the state that we can be able to access throughout all of our code. After specifying that we want to send to recipe ID, I'll pass in the request option. So for example, in this case, we're going to have our request options. After passing the request options, we shall expect a response. So we shall expect a promise containing a response. So this response is going to be in JSON. So we shall say res.json, and we shall need to have our data. For example, we shall just, the first thing we shall need to do is to just console log this data. And then after doing this, we're going to catch any error. So what I'll do is to say catch error. Then I'm going to just console log any error that you may get in this case. So after doing that, let's try to actually make this work. So if I go to our front end, so right now we have our front end. So if I say update a recipe, let's say settle updated, actually let's say updated. So let's say our description going to be also updated. We try to save this. We now see that our token has been expired. So let's try to renew it by logging out and then logging in again. So I'm going to close this, then log out. So what I'm going to do is to log in, a username and a password. So if I log in, I try again. So I'm going to update this. So this is going to be potato updated and then description updated. So if I save this, let's try to see what our console logs are. I went to console. Right now we see an object returning. So in this case, we see that our description has been updated and then our object has been updated, which means that our request is now actually successful. So let's try to actually see. So when I refresh, hoping that everything is working. So let's try to also update this. So we now see that our potato has been updated and our description has been updated. So right now our update functionality is working, but we need a way to update our UI. Now to keep it simple, what we're going to do is to actually reload our page using JavaScript. So to do that, I'm going to come and create a simple variable called reload. There's going to be a function that's going to be capable of reloading our page every time we update. So what I'm going to do is to just come right in here, and I'll just do that by saying const load. The load is going to be a variable, so we're going to access window, then location. So we're going to access window.location, then we're going to access reload. And this will basically reload our page. So after doing this, I'll just come right in here. After after updating our recipe, what we shall need is to reload our page so as to show our updated recipes. What I'm going to do is to just come say reload. When I save, head over to our client. So right now we are having our reloads taking place a lot of times. So let's go ahead and fix this. So to fix that, what I'm going to actually do is to come right here and remove this reload statement. So I'm going to remove this reload. Then come on only call it only when we need to actually reload our page. So I'm going to come and paste it within our update function. So right now we see that our recipes are being shown. So when I say update, let me say update 1 and then recipe updated 1. So when we save, that's when we see that our page is reloading. So in this video, we've been able to see how to update these recipes on our front end. If you have any suggestions on how to do this better, please leave a comment down in the description. And thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.